Most of us probably think the internet started with a couple of brilliant geeks tinkering away in a garage somewhere. But the real story? Oh, it's way more surprising. It involves secret codes, absolutely massive war machines, and a vision that had nothing to do with making money. So let's dive in and find out what really happened.
So where did this thing that we pretty much can't live without actually come from? Well, the answer takes us way further back than you might think, back to a time of global war.
Yeah, you heard that right. The very basic ideas of electronic computing that make the internet possible, they weren't born for social media or streaming movies. They were invented out of a desperate, urgent need to crack enemy codes during World War II. So let's start our story at a place that was one of the most closely guarded secrets of the entire war, a country estate in the UK called Bletchley Park. Just try to imagine the scene, right? It's this frantic, high-stakes race against the clock. Enemy messages are being sent wirelessly, so anybody can listen in. The only thing protecting them is incredibly complex encryption, and the Allies had to figure out a way to break those codes and break them fast.
And this is where you see this massive leap in technology. On one hand, you had the bomb bee, which was this mechanical marvel of whirring gears and clicking relays. But as the enemy codes got more and more complex, it just couldn't keep up. The solution was Colossus. A beast of a machine with no moving parts, just over 1,500 glowing vacuum tubes, and it was 1,000 times faster. This, right here, was the birth of electronic computing.
But here's the thing. After the war, Bletchley Park was completely shut down. All of its work was classified top secret for decades. But you can't classify an idea. It's brilliant engineers and thinkers scattered to universities all over the world, and they carried with them this one simple, powerful truth. Electronics could think. And that single idea, planted in the minds of post-war academics, would eventually grow into something unbelievable.
All right, let's fast forward a couple of decades to the 1960s. The idea of electronic computing is taking hold, but now it's up against a totally different but just as massive problem.
Back then, computers were the size of a room. They cost an absolute fortune, and they were incredibly rare. I mean, an entire university might only have one. So the big question was, how could researchers all across the country possibly share these few precious machines?
The first try was a system they called store and forward. And, well, it was kind of a mess. Imagine someone sends a big file. It would just completely clog up the one single expensive phone line connecting two computers. Your tiny little email, it just had to get in line and wait. It was a digital traffic jam, getting stored on one computer, then the next, waiting for its turn.
Now, don't get me wrong, being able to send a message across the country was revolutionary, but it was painfully slow, unreliable. A message could take hours, sometimes even days, to finally get where it was going. There just had to be a better way.
And that breakthrough, it came from a military-funded research project called the ARPANET. They came up with a truly revolutionary idea that is the foundation of the entire modern internet.
Okay, and here's something you hear all the time that's not quite right. The myth is that the ARPANET was built to survive a nuclear attack. And while being tough was definitely a feature, when you talk to the people who actually built it, they say the main reason was much more practical. It was all about finally solving that resource-sharing problem for academics.
So, how'd they solve it? Well, let's try an analogy. Imagine you have to mail a 300-page book to a friend, but the only thing the post office will give you is a huge stack of postcards. What do?
Well, the solution is actually pretty simple and kind of elegant, right? You'd break the novel down into tiny chunks that can fit on one postcard. You'd number each one, page 1 of 300, page 2 of 300, put the same address on all of them, and just dump them in the mailbox. They might all take different paths to get there, but your friend on the other end can just reassemble them in the right order.
And that, right there, is the magic of packet switching. Instead of one huge message clogging up the whole line, your message gets broken up into thousands of these tiny little packets. They can all travel independently through the network, which lets everyone share the connection efficiently. This was the absolute game changer.
The very first test of this brand new system was just perfectly comically human. It's October 29th, 1969. A team at UCLA is trying to log into a computer at Stanford. They typed an L, and on the other end, they got the L. They typed an O, they got the O. They typed a G, and the whole system crashed. So the first message ever sent on the internet was LO.
So the ARPANET was a massive success, but there was a big problem. It was a pretty exclusive club. mostly from military-funded researchers. The next big step was to take this incredible technology and open it up to the entire academic world.
And once again, the problem really came down to money. The National Science Foundation just couldn't afford to buy every university a $10 million supercomputer, not when a typical research grant was only $250,000. Really, the only solution was to build one big national network so everybody could share just a few super powerful machines.
But this time, the roadblock wasn't technical. It was political. The big, powerful telecom companies saw a public data network as direct competition to their monopoly on phone calls, and they lobbied Congress hard to stop it from ever happening.
So what do? Well, they came up with this brilliant end run around the whole problem. They formed a public-private partnership. And here's the genius part. They didn't call it a public network for everyone. Oh no. They framed it as just a specialized, high-speed tool to connect 5 supercomputer centers. It was a genius move that slipped right under the nose of the lobbyists.
And man, once those floodgates were open, the growth was just explosive. The NSFNet backbone went live in '88, and by 1995, it was so successful that it had created a huge new market and commercial companies were ready to take over. Its mission was complete. So this brings us to the final handoff. How did this 50-year journey from secret code-breaking machines to academic networks become the global internet we all use every day?
You see, by the mid-90s, the government's work was basically done. It had paid for the research, it had built the backbone, and it had proven that the whole concept worked on a massive scale. It created this thriving ecosystem, and then it stepped back and handed the keys over to the commercial world.
And that all leaves us with this one kind of profound final thought. One of the internet's key pioneers, a guy named John Postal, was asked once why he never tried to cash in on his foundational work. His answer says everything about the collaborative, non-commercial spirit that created this thing. He just said, "That's just not what this is about."